I work as a science journalist, and I recently did an investigative story into whales and learned how much there is still to learn about whales and so many unknowns, which is why I'm so excited to welcome Morgan Martin. She is based at the University of Victoria in Canada. Currently, she's working with the Wildlife Conservation Society of Canada on a project to conserve bowhead whales. Whales, of course, are cetaceans, which also include dolphins and porpoises. She studies their behavior and how they communicate using observational tools such as underwater acoustics. And she's going to share a bit more about how they use echolocation, what that is, how it works, and much more. So please put your questions as they occur to you into the chat, and we'll get to those. And I will pass it off to Morgan. Morgan, thank you so much for being with us.
Hey, thank you as well. I am really excited to be here and a part of the festival. I just wonder, can you see my screen okay?
Go ahead and share.
Can you hear me? Hi, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, and let's see if we can get your screen on here.
Okay, I'm going to go to share screen. And then let's see. All right. How's that? Is that okay?
Yep, we can see it.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for having me. I'm a postdoctoral research scientist at the University of Victoria, and I'm currently working also with the Wildlife Conservation Society of Canada on a bowhead whale acoustics project. We're looking at how shipping noise up in the Canadian Arctic is potentially going to disturb bowhead whale populations. So for now, I will give you a bit of a background about what I do for a living, and then we'll talk about some awesome facts about how dolphins and whales echolocate and communicate with one another. But first, I'd like to show you just a couple pictures of the wonderful animals that I work with to help put into perspective just about how gigantic these animals are. Okay, so this is a blue whale, the largest animal to have ever existed on planet Earth. And they can reach up to almost 100 feet long and weigh up to 170 tons. If you notice in the bottom corner of the picture is a human scuba diving for a size comparison. So please keep in mind as you listen to this presentation that my job working with these animals is not like your typical job working with some animals that you can pick up and move around easily. This is a humpback whale with another scuba diver for size comparison. These are about half the size of a blue whale, and they reach up to around 50 feet and weigh over 60 tons. And like you may be possibly wondering, how do you study animals like this? And for me, I am a marine mammal scientist, particularly in the field of cetaceans, which, as you mentioned, is the word we use to group together all the different species of whales, dolphins, and porpoises. And I focus on underwater acoustics. So this means that I study how sound travels underwater, especially sounds that cetaceans make. The majority of cetaceans can echolocate, just like bats. And that means that they produce a form of biological sonar to help navigate underwater. They also use their sonar to hunt fish and other prey. And these animals are often highly social species. And because of that, they communicate a lot underwater. So I also study their communication sounds and how these differ from species to species. And underwater acoustics is a booming field right now. There are a lot of projects studying how underwater noise pollution affects marine mammals. And acoustics can also be used as a way to help estimate cetacean population sizes for a given area in the ocean. We can record the sounds that cetaceans make, and from this we can describe what species they are, how they're using a given area, maybe they're using it for hunting or traveling, etc. And we can also estimate how many of these animals are in a given area. So I want to go over some quick basics with you really quick to make sure you guys are following what I'm talking about. And as I mentioned, a cetacean is your word for all of the whales, dolphins, and porpoise species on Earth. All cetaceans are considered marine mammals, which means that they spend their entire lives in water. They must go to the surface every few minutes to breathe air, and to do this, they use a blowhole or a pair of blowholes located on the top of their heads. Since they are mammals, they are all warm-blooded. They give birth to live young, and their babies drink milk from their mothers for around 6 months up to 2 years. There are two different groups of cetaceans, and they're very different. The first group is called baleen whales, and the second group are called toothed whales. So there are 90 species of cetaceans on planet Earth. And of these 90, 73 belong to the toothed whale family, like I just mentioned. And these will be all the whales that are heads are pointed on the right-hand side of your screen, pointing one way. And then all the baleen whales are these larger whales on the left-hand side. So just to keep in perspective for you, the differences between the two groups here, and that there's a lot more toothed whales than there are baleen whales. Baleen whales are named for their specialized filter-like structures in their mouth, which are called baleen plates. And they hang down from their upper jaw. They're made of keratin, just like your hair and your fingernails are. Baleen whales feed on tiny creatures called plankton and krill, which get trapped in their mouth by their baleen when they scoop up a mouthful of water. They are the largest animals to exist and to have ever existed on planet Earth. And they also perform some of the longest migrations out of any animal on Earth every year. Toothed whales. So they're named toothed whales because all of their teeth in their upper and lower jaw are all the exact same shape. These are your predators. They use their teeth to help them feed on fish, squid, and sometimes other marine mammals. And all toothed whales echolocate. They use their echolocation to navigate and help find food underwater. I mentioned to you that I work in underwater acoustics, studying the sounds that cetaceans make underwater. So why is sound important to cetaceans and marine mammals in general? In the ocean, very little sunlight can reach past the surface. This means that after just going a few feet or meters underwater, the ocean gets very dark and you cannot see anything. Since they can't see in the dark water that these animals live in, they actually rely on using sound for everything that they would normally use vision for. Sound travels really well underwater. In fact, it travels 4.5 times faster underwater than it does in air, making it the perfect medium for these animals to use it to hunt and communicate with one another on a daily basis. I mentioned that all toothed whales can echolocate, and they do so frequently, usually a few times every second. When a dolphin echolocates, it produces a pulse of sound energy that is projected out of its forehead, or what we call the melon of the animal, and it gets projected into the water in front of the animal. This animal is producing a biological form of sonar, and we call these sounds echolocation clicks. The dolphin will produce a series of echolocation clicks in a row and wait for them to bounce off an object underwater. When this happens, the dolphin receives the echo from the object that the click bounced off of. For example, a fish, like you see in this picture. The echo from the fish is picked up in the dolphin's bottom jawbone, and from there it travels to the brain to send a message about the location and the size of the fish, which is pretty cool, huh? Part of my job is to record different species of dolphins underwater to learn about how they echolocate and communicate with one another. This is an example of what some echolocation clicks look like when I look at them on a computer screen. This way of looking at sound is called a spectrogram. Each individual yellow vertical line in the spectrogram is a single echolocation click produced by a Commerson's dolphin, which is the animal shown in the photo. These are beautiful, tiny black and white dolphins, and they're one of the smallest dolphin species in the world, weighing less than 100 pounds. They're native to Patagonia, which is in southern South America, and I went there last year to record them. Something cool to note is that I put a red circle around the uppermost hearing level for humans, which is 20 kilohertz. These dolphins are what we call ultrasonic because they echolocate at frequencies higher than humans can hear. And if you look at the spectrogram, you'll notice that their echolocation clicks are all above 100 kilohertz, which means that these dolphins echolocate 5 times higher than humans can hear. It's pretty amazing. In the top corner, you'll see a small photo of a hydrophone, and this is a type of underwater recording microphone that I use to record the dolphin sounds. Modern technology has really helped us out for working in underwater acoustics. We used to have to bring in a ton of electrical, battery-operated gear and cords onto a boat. And then we'd have to set it up, hope it works, and then go out and try to find some dolphins. Nowadays, we can bring these small handheld hydrophones with us anywhere, and they charge with a USB port and can hold a battery for several days at a time. This makes working in remote locations really, really helpful. So how about communication? I mentioned to you that dolphins communicate a lot underwater, and they actually produce 2 main types of communication sounds. The first one are called whistles, which are kind of similar to what you would think of humans, how they can make whistles. And whistles can be unique to individual dolphins depending on the species. Some species actually use it as their signature to identify themselves underwater. And here are some examples of some bottlenose dolphin whistles. The second main type of communication sound dolphins produce are called burst pulses. A burst pulse is exactly what its name implies. It's a burst of pulses. These are actually just a bunch of echolocation clicks emitted together at extremely fast rates in packets. And they're emitted at around 500 clicks per second. They are produced so fast that it actually produces a tonal sound to our human ears. And so I'll play you this little snippet, the same one that you just saw on the slide before. This is how our human ears actually interpret the sounds. This is a photo of my research partner, Sarah, when we went to Antarctica for work last year. We were using this hydrophone to record humpback whales and seals down there. We typically tie the hydrophone to a rope and connect the rope to the side of the boat and then throw the hydrophone in the water. The hydrophone will record a wide range of frequencies underwater, and then we can download the recordings later in the day onto our laptops when we get back to land. Here's a quick video of the hydrophone underwater recording some Peel's dolphins in Patagonia last year. And you won't be able to hear these dolphins echolocating because they're actually ultrasonic, just like those Commerson's dolphins. And you can see the hydrophone hanging on a little white rope here underwater. So that's just a simple way how to collect recordings. You kind of wait for the animals to come up to you, and the recorder just records continuously underwater. Here's another short video of some of those same Peel's dolphins being a total nuisance to some southern right whales, which are baleen whales, that were hanging out together in the same area. And this is just to show you that sometimes we get lucky and we get to record two species at once. A newer research avenue that I've begun working with is using scientific drones to help you collect data on cetaceans. Last year, while I was in Patagonia, we used a drone to fly over groups of dolphins while recording their acoustics underwater with a hydrophone. This gives us a great view of how the dolphins are behaving and when we sync the underwater recordings with the drone video footage. We can actually look into see and pair them together and see what types of sounds the dolphins make when they're doing different behaviors like resting, traveling, or socializing with each other. This helps me to piece together a better idea of what we call a dolphin's acoustic repertoire, which is just the same word we've used for vocabulary. And here's an example of some of the drone video footage we collected last year of Commerson's dolphins. So we can actually use the drone video footage to measure several things from the dolphins, like swimming speed, breathing rates, and something actually really cool we've just figured out how to do is that by measuring the distance the dolphin is from the hydrophone underwater, shown by the red line in this photo, we can back calculate how loud or strong the dolphin sonar is by measuring how loud their echolocation clicks are. We can also use the drone footage to measure the body length and assess the size and weight of the animals that we record. And this technique is called photogrammetry, and it allows us to assess the health of the animals in that population. Sometimes the drone can help you capture some really unexpected events as well. This happens to be the largest group of cormorant dolphins ever recorded, and it happened to us on Christmas Eve. There are about 100 of these animals swimming around our boat, and this is really unusual for this species because they're normally only seen in groups of 3 or 4 animals. So on this one, I've actually manipulated the sound in the underwater recordings to bend it down into human hearing range so that you can hear what their echolocation clicks sound like. And since there's so many dolphins in this video, it actually just sounds like an overwhelming bunch of buzzing sounds going on. Yeah, that was a really fun day for us. So my work and passions have taken me all over the world, and I'm very fortunate to have seen some pretty cool things. An average day for me can be completely different depending on if I'm working in the field or if I'm in my office. Last year, I was really fortunate and had 3 full months of field work before the pandemic hit. I spent December through February in Patagonia and Antarctica. And on a typical day of fieldwork there, my research partner Sarah and I would go out on the boat for most of the day with the Coast Guard to look for dolphins. When we found them, we would launch the drone and also deploy the hydrophones into the water over the side of the boat just to record them both at the same time. However, most of my days are spent working at a desk, going through the recordings that I collected during my fieldwork and analyzing the data in a sound software program, and then writing papers about what I found. I think the hardest part of my job revolves around securing funding for new projects and salary. Research-related positions often require you to write and submit rather complicated grant applications that are highly competitive. These grants generally only provide funding money for 1 to 2 years, depending on the project. So for me, my current research project I mentioned is up in Canada, working on bowhead whales, which are the longest, living mammal on the planet. They can get up to be over 200 years old, which is super cool. And my research project will go there until about mid-2022. And it involves tagging these whales using suction cup tags that are non-invasive. And basically, it provides a 3D recording of all the whales' body movements underwater. And they have a hydrophone built in on them so that they can record all the sounds that the whales make, as well as any sounds that they hear around them. This is a conservation project trying to assess how shipping noise causes disturbance to bowhead whales, because since the Arctic is melting, a lot of different areas for shipping routes are opening up out there, and it's essentially overlapping with these pristine habitats for marine mammals up there that have never been introduced to ships before. So, as you know, our planet currently has a big issue with underwater noise pollution in the ocean from shipping, seismic oil activity, Navy sonar, marine construction, you name it. Each marine mammal species is unique in the frequencies that it uses to communicate, and thus each species must be studied in order to understand how noise pollution of various forms may affect or even harm these animals. From there, we can provide the results that we find to policymakers who are responsible for governing the oceans and putting marine laws into place. And I think I will leave you with that. Thank you very much. Please let me know if you have any questions.
Morgan, thank you so much. I'm sure it never gets old being able to spy and hang out with whales and dolphins. A lot of excitement from people in the chat about that. And I think it's such a recent phenomenon that we're actually able to listen and hear these sounds in songs. It wasn't until the 1970s that the first songs were put out into the world, and it was really a game changer in how people saw whales and appreciated them. I'm wondering, given that they spend so much of their lives underwater, and we still don't even know, a lot of their migration routes and all of these things that you kind of touched on, what are the most exciting unknowns or questions you have in your work in trying to understand whales and dolphins?
Oh gosh. For me, it's their communication with one another. That really, really drives me. I am so fascinated. Like I showed you those slides of the burst pulses. So even within that category, they alter these little patterns of burst pulses that it's almost like Morse code, that they speak to each other and they repeat them over and over again. And then others seem to have different ones that they reply back with. And to me, kind of cracking that is the ultimate mystery, and something so cool, I think, is their communication is so much more evolved than I think a lot of people think it is. So
one of my favorite facts I learned about sperm whales, another toothed whale, was that the sound that they emit is so strong that they can stun their prey to death. So not only communicating with one another, but using it as a tactic for hunting. I believe there's a project off of Dominica where the sperm whale's language is being recorded and studied using machine learning. Are there new technologies and tools that go into trying to analyze the communication that you are able to record?
Absolutely. I think machine learning and deep learning algorithms are really big. Using AI has really started to branch into acoustics, just because the amount of data and recordings that you collect sometimes can be overwhelming, because you'll leave a lot of places leave a recorder out for a whole year, cycling on and off every few minutes, and to hand that over to one person to look through can take them ages, so using machine learning has become actually really, really opened like a lot of doors for people to get through all these recordings faster and to pick out the real points where all the animals are actually present and stuff. So absolutely, yeah.
And we had someone asking, perhaps you could remind us again, the difference between the two types of communication, the echolocation and then the singing that the baleen whales do.
Sure. Baleen whales, at this moment, we do not believe that they echolocate. There's a couple of speculations about it, but they do make a lot of sounds. They make a lot of lower frequency communication sounds underwater to contact each other, and those travel really far underwater. The toothed whales, they're the ones that have quite the wide variety of sounds that they make with echolocation signals, as well as the burst pulses and the whistles and stuff like that.
And I've heard that the sounds can travel upwards of thousands of miles undersea. Is that true?
Depends on what they are. So the frequency is really the most important factor. The larger the baleen animals, typically they are all in the lower frequency realm, and lower frequency sounds travel much farther than higher frequency sounds do underwater. So yes, they can travel, certainly, like some over ocean basins and things like that. Yeah.
And I know it's really hard to pick, but a lot of curiosity as to if you have a favorite kind of whale or dolphin.
Oh, yes. My favorite is the narwhal. It's the Arctic species. They're the one with the big long tusk that comes out. They're called the unicorn of the sea. They have my heart. Their tusk is actually their front left incisor, their tooth that grows up and erupts out of their top lip and keeps growing. And it gets to be, I think, between around 3 meters long. And these animals are just incredible. I find them gorgeous and super interesting.
And you had mentioned the shipping traffic and the noise that comes from it. You know, there's a whole history of whaling and this treatment towards whaling as a game animal. But I was surprised to learn that the major threat to them now is not actually the hunting, but fishing nets and shipping traffic coming into ports. Can you just put this into perspective for us in terms of how big of a threat is it to whale populations, and how important is it to work with communities to make sure that they have the space that they need?
Absolutely. I think that this is like the biggest threat for us as conservation scientists for marine mammals nowadays is it's human pollution, essentially. So, it used to be whaling of them actually physically removing the animals from the ocean. But now it's more of along the lines of you have bycatch in your fishing nets where the animals are caught accidentally, or you have noise pollution, which can be, an equally bad thing. And as I mentioned, how noise travels so far and fast underwater, it really isn't the same as it is on land. So, sound can actually just go and go and go underwater and affect these animals from miles away, where they have no idea the ship is even there. They couldn't see it with their own eyes, but they could get blasted by some sound and scares them. And, sometimes it can be at levels where it actually does cause physical harm to them. So I think for us, sound mitigation underwater is our big driver. We're trying to develop slower mitigation zones. We found a few slow ships down where they're overlapping in migration areas with cetaceans, that it actually does reduce the sound the ship puts out, and it also makes the ship slower, so it's a less risk of colliding with the animals as well. And so that's one big way. They're also working to create quieter ships and shipping docks and stuff now with the engineers. So we're slowly moving towards it. A lot of places are ahead. Canada and the US and Europe are doing a good job with this. And then other places will follow. I think it's just going to take time.
And we had a question if you could give us a population estimate for perhaps the bowhead whales that you work with.
Sure. Well, there's actually 4 different recognized individual stocks for bowheads, and 2 of them are very low. They're in the hundreds. But then one I'm working on is about 6,000 animals, I think, and the other one is around, I want to say it's around 16,000, I think. So they're doing well right now. They've bounced back. At least the 2 stocks have, yeah.
And something scientists and ecologists like yourself study how the lives of species relate to other species in any given ecosystem. And I know the role of whale poop even plays such a significant part in that nutrients then floating down to the darker depths of the ocean and feeding smaller animals and microorganisms. What is the importance of whales to the ecosystem for other species around them?
Oh gosh, I mean, yeah, you named it right there. Just the way that they recycle nutrients by these big baleen whales eat so much plankton and krill, and then just like it, whale poop becomes its own source of detritus down at the bottom and feeds a bunch of other organisms, and the whole process starts all over again. And essentially, even when a whale dies and sinks to the bottom, it becomes a massive feeding aggregation for sharks and all kinds of fish and other animals that are living off of its decomposed body. It itself becomes its own ecosystem. So absolutely, they're a very pivotal part of the food chain, I think.
And perhaps a little bit of a morbid follow-up question, but when whales die, do some of them float to the surface, some of them fall? What are the differences with how they die?
Oh gosh. Well, I think a lot of it depends on how much blubber that they have on them. So some definitely float. Some actually float, and then when their gases expand inside of them as they're decomposing, and then they'll sink eventually after a few days. But some, I think I've read stories of hunters up in the Inuit hunters that say, depending on the type of year, when you harpoon them, sometimes they sink, sometimes they float, and that's based off of what time of year when they're doing a lot of feeding and they get a lot of blubber on them. So if they're had eaten a lot recently, they float. And if they're coming off of a long migration and hadn't been hunting and foraging, then they're pretty lean, they sink. So
Morgan, thank you so much. Can you leave us with letting us know a little bit about your upcoming plans and fieldwork? If anything's on the horizon for you, we'd love to hear more about your exciting adventures ahead.
Absolutely. So at the very end of my talk, I mentioned I'm going to be going to Igloolik, which is up in Nunavut, the province in Canada, the territory. And we're really hoping this goes through. It'll be in June and July this summer. And we're waiting on kind of COVID vaccine and protocols to see if we can go in, because we're working in an Indigenous community up there. So fingers crossed. And if it happens, we'll be up there with a team tagging bowhead whales with those 3D recording tags. So it'll be super cool.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We'll be sure to share your social information in the chat so everyone can follow along. And thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you too. I had a wonderful time.